33 points created in under 20 minutes of basketball. Not scored, not attempted, created. And if you don't immediately understand why that distinction matters more than anything else you'll read in a box score tonight, then stay right here, because by the time this is over, you're going to see this performance in a completely different light than every highlight reel and post-game recap has been showing you. There is a version of this story that the casual viewer walks away with. Caitlin Clark had a nice debut. She looked comfortable. She fit in well with the team. That version is technically accurate and almost entirely useless, because what happened on that floor against Senegal wasn't a nice debut. It wasn't a comfortable performance. It was a live demonstration of something that the women's basketball world has been arguing about in theory for months, and it landed with the kind of clarity that ends theoretical debates and starts real ones. The real conversation isn't about whether she belongs on Team USA. That conversation is over. The real conversation now is about what Team USA looks like without her, and whether anyone in that committee room is willing to say out loud what the tape is screaming at full volume. We're going to get into all of it. The numbers, the tape, the teammates, the third quarter that nobody is talking about nearly enough, and the 2028 Olympic picture that just got significantly more complicated for everyone who isn't Caitlin Clark. But before we get into the full breakdown, if this is the kind of analysis that goes deeper than the surface-level recap you've already seen everywhere else, hit that like button right now. It tells us you want more of this, and it helps us keep pulling threads on stories that actually have real stakes attached to them. Let's start with what actually happened on that floor, because the numbers deserve to be read correctly before anything else gets discussed. 17 points, 12 assists, 19 minutes of game time, a plus 35 rating. Those are the headline figures, and they're impressive on their own, but the number that reframes all of them is 33. That is the total points created figure. Her own scoring combined with the three-point baskets her passing generated in real time, stacked together and measured against what the offense was producing while she was active. 33 points created in 19 minutes against a team that was not a pushover in the context of international qualifying basketball. Now take that number and sit with it for a second, because the broadcast moved past it, the recaps mentioned it in passing, the highlight packages cut around it entirely, and that's the problem with how this performance is being processed, because 33 points created in under 20 minutes isn't a fun fact you drop into a conversation. It's the central argument. It's the thesis. Every other data point from this game is a footnote to that number. To understand why it matters so much, you have to understand the difference between a player who fills a stat line and a player who generates offense at a systemic level. A player who fills a stat line gives you something to point at. Big scoring night, strong assist total, solid shooting percentage. The production is real, it's countable, and it tells you something about what that individual did, but it doesn't always tell you what the team became because of them. A player who generates offense at a systemic level does something different. They change what's available for everyone else. They make shots easier, open up driving lanes that weren't there before, pull defensive attention in ways that free up spacing the offense was never going to create on its own. Their fingerprints are on possessions they never technically touched, and when you try to measure them purely through individual box score numbers, you almost always end up undercounting what they actually did. Caitlin Clark does both. She fills the stat line and she generates at the systemic level simultaneously. And the 33 points created figure is what happens when you try to capture the systemic contribution in a single number. It's not perfect, no single number is, but it points at something real, and that something real is what this game was actually about. 12 assists in 19 minutes is a pace that, if sustained across a full 40-minute game, would put her in historical company for a single performance. Projecting rotations and game flow make that a purely mathematical exercise rather than a realistic expectation, but the math still tells you something important about the rate at which she was operating. The offense wasn't just moving, it was moving at a speed and efficiency that the team hadn't been operating at before she checked in, and the numbers reflect that gap clearly. The other figure that deserves more attention than it's been getting is the plus 35. In 19 minutes on the floor, the gap between Team USA and Senegal grew by 35 points while she was active. That is not a product of luck or favorable matchups or a defense that happened to be having a bad stretch. That is a player consistently making the correct decision faster than the defense can respond to it, over and over for the entirety of her time on the court. The efficiency wasn't occasional.
It was sustained. Now, let's talk about what that efficiency actually looked like in real time, because the numbers only tell you what happened. The tape tells you why. From the moment Caitlin Clark stepped on the floor, the tempo of the game shifted, not gradually, not over the course of a few possessions while everyone found their rhythm, immediately. The very first time she had the ball in her hands, the pace of the game was different. And the reason it was different is something that gets described as court vision, but that phrase doesn't fully capture what was happening. Court vision suggests a player who sees the floor well and makes smart passes. Clark does that, but what happened against Senegal was something beyond seeing the floor. It was a shared anticipation between her and the players around her. The moment the ball was in her hands, Ryan Howard was already attacking downhill in full flight. Paige Bueckers was already pushing ahead on the wing before the previous possession had even finished. Kelsey Plum was already finding open space on the perimeter because she understood what was coming. None of that movement was reactive, it was predictive. The players around Clark weren't waiting to see where the pass was going before deciding to move. They were moving because they knew, on some instinctive level, built through practices and film sessions and shared basketball experience, that if they ran, a perfectly timed pass was already on its way. That instinct, that collective trust in her decision-making, is what transforms a talented basketball team into something that looks almost mechanical in its precision. There is a distinction in basketball that doesn't get discussed enough between a facilitator and a tempo conductor. A facilitator moves the ball efficiently. They make the right pass, avoid bad decisions, keep possessions alive, and distribute to shooters in rhythm. Facilitation is a skill, and it's a valuable one. Good facilitators make teams better in measurable ways. But facilitation is reactive by nature. The offense creates an opportunity, and the facilitator delivers the ball to it. A tempo conductor does something fundamentally different. A tempo conductor doesn't just respond to what the offense creates. They create the conditions under which the offense becomes possible. They determine the speed at which every possession operates. They decide before the play develops how fast or slow the game is going to be. And because everyone else on the floor is calibrated to that decision, the defense is perpetually in a position of responding to something that has already happened, rather than anticipating something that might. Clark did the latter against Senegal. She was not responding to the offense, she was generating it. Every decision she made arrived before the defense could close the gap. The pace wasn't fast in a chaotic or reckless way, it was fast and surgical. There is a critical difference between those two things. Reckless pace leads to contested shots and turnovers in traffic. Surgical pace leads to open looks and layups and free throw attempts because the defense is always one step behind trying to recover rather than in position trying to contest. Defenses barely had time to set their feet before possessions were concluding. And the thing that makes that kind of pace so difficult to defend against isn't just the speed, it's the certainty behind it. Clark doesn't hesitate. There's no half beat of indecision between when she reads the floor and when she delivers the ball. That absence of hesitation is what makes the pace devastating, because by the time a defense recognizes what's happening, it has already happened. Now, we have to talk about the turnovers, because they're going to come up, and they deserve to be examined properly rather than cited as a general criticism and moved on from. She finished with 3 turnovers. For some analysts, that number is going to be the first thing they reach for when they want to temper the narrative around this performance. And on the surface, 3 turnovers in 19 minutes is a legitimate thing to flag. Turnover rate matters, especially at the international level, where experienced defenses make you pay for every mistake. But here's what context does to that argument. 2 of those 3 turnovers came in the final 10 seconds of a game that had already been decided by a blowout margin. The outcome wasn't in question. The competitive portion of the game had long since concluded. What was happening in those final seconds was the kind of loose, experimental basketball that teams play when the scoreboard has stopped mattering and players are just finishing out the clock. Counting those turnovers in the same breath as turnovers that occurred during contested, competitive game situations is a category error. They are not the same thing, and treating them as equivalent skews the analysis in a direction that isn't honest.
The third turnover is the interesting one. It was a full-court pass to Angel Reese that nearly connected. Think about what that sentence is actually describing. A full-court pass to a specific target in game conditions that nearly connected. Not a Hail Mary thrown into traffic hoping someone was there. A targeted, read-based decision to throw the ball the length of the floor to a player she identified as having position, executed with enough accuracy that it nearly worked. That is not carelessness. That is not a reckless decision from a player who was out of control. That is a player operating with a level of confidence and spatial vision that belongs on a completely different scale from most of the guards who will ever play this game. The fact that it didn't connect doesn't retroactively make it a bad decision any more than a half-court shot that rims out makes the attempt reckless. She saw something, she had the arm and the accuracy to attempt it, and it nearly worked. Context collapses the turnover argument entirely, and once the turnover argument is off the table, what you're left with is the rest of the performance, which is 33 points created, 12 assists, a plus 35, and a team that looked like a completely different offensive organism when she was running it versus when she wasn't. That last part is where the real story of this game lives, and we're going to get to it. But first, let's go through the rest of the roster, because this was a team performance, and the individuals around Clark deserve proper examination. Rhyne Howard deserves genuine recognition for what she did in this game. If someone made the argument that Howard was the individual scorer of the game, that case holds up. She was aggressive from the opening possession, physical, effective at every level. She kept sustained offensive pressure on a defense that had no answer for the pace being pushed, and her scoring efficiency throughout reflected a player who was operating with real confidence and not just benefiting from open looks. Here's where a distinction needs to be drawn clearly, because it matters for the larger conversation. There is a difference between leading in scoring and leading in offense. Leading in scoring means you put more points on the board than anyone else on your team. Leading in offense means you were the primary reason the offense functioned the way it did. Those two things can sometimes belong to the same player. On this night, they didn't. Howard was the leading scorer, Clark was leading the offense, and that distinction carries real weight when the conversation turns to roster construction and Olympic starting lineups, because what you need from your point guard and what you need from your wing scorer are not the same thing, and tonight, both roles were filled by different players performing at a high level in their respective capacities. That's actually a good sign for Team USA. Not a complicated sign, a good one. The concern with elite rosters is not whether you have talented players, it's whether those talents coexist in ways that make the team better, rather than creating friction or redundancy. When Howard is scoring and Clark is conducting, there's no friction, there's symbiosis. That's the version of this team you want to see more of. Kelsey Plum was functional in this game. She played within the system, made the right decisions at the right times, and avoided creating problems. On a roster this deep, with this much talent at every position, functional and disciplined is sometimes exactly the role. Plum has proven at every level of this sport that she's capable of being more than functional when the moment calls for it. This particular game wasn't that moment. It was a game where the system was already working at a high level, and the job was to operate within it without disrupting what was working. She did that. Chelsea Gray struggled. There's no version of honest analysis that softens that conclusion into something more comfortable. The rhythm wasn't there. Several decisions felt disconnected from the tempo the rest of the offense was trying to sustain. Passes that should have arrived in stride came late. Reads that should have been automatic required an extra beat of processing. This isn't a performance that defines Gray's value or her history or her capabilities, because her track record speaks for itself at a volume that one-off night can't silence. But the performance was what it was, and the contrast between the offensive flow when Gray was directing versus when Clark was directing was one of the clearest and most important things the game produced. Paige Buckers came into this game visibly tight. The stage was real, the implications were real.
International qualifying basketball with Olympic roster conversation attached to every possession carries a different weight than even a high-stakes regular season game, and Buckers was feeling that weight in the early going. Her offense took time to find its footing. Shots that she normally makes in her sleep weren't going in, and the body language in the early minutes reflected a player who was pressing slightly harder than the moment required.
But here's what stood out even during that cold stretch. The defense never wavered. She was guarding full court, pressuring ball handlers, doing the physical, grinding work that holds possessions together when the scoring touch hasn't arrived yet. That is not an easy thing to do. When your offense is cold and the pressure of the moment is sitting on your shoulders, the temptation is to press harder on offense to find your way out of the struggle, rather than channeling that energy into defensive effort that doesn't show up in a box score. Buchers channeled it into defense. That's maturity. That's a player who understands her value to the team extends beyond what she contributes offensively, and who commits to that understanding even when it would be easier not to. She eventually settled, and once she did, she started to look like exactly the player the basketball world already knows she is. Quick, decisive, dangerous off the dribble, and effective in spaces where defenders think they have her contained. The early tightness didn't define the performance. The way she worked through it did. Angel Reese's assignment in this game was physical and specific. Defense, rebounding, paint presence, making life uncomfortable for anyone trying to operate near the basket on the other end. She collected 4 fouls in limited minutes, and the instinct is to look at that number as a negative. But 4 fouls in limited minutes is actually a reflection of how active and physical she was near the basket throughout her time on the floor. She wasn't fouling because she was out of position or making lazy defensive plays. She was fouling because she was everywhere, contesting everything, and competing at a level of physicality that the game's flow demanded. She fulfilled her role completely. Erica Hamby converted several easy transition baskets throughout the game, and it's worth noting that those baskets didn't feel easy because Hamby isn't a skilled finisher. They felt easy because the pace of play manufactured those opportunities almost automatically. The spacing Clark creates, combined with the speed at which positions transition from defense to offense, produces finishing opportunities that look simple, but are actually the product of a system operating correctly. Hamby was in the right places because the system put her there, and she finished when given the chance. That's exactly what you need from that role. Now here is where the real story of this game lives, and it's the part that the broadcast glossed over, the recaps summarized in a single sentence, and the highlight packages ignored almost entirely. There was a stretch in the third quarter, a veteran-heavy lineup, experienced pieces, players who have been in this program for years, who know the system, who have played together on international stages before and won. The kind of lineup that, on paper, should be able to sustain offensive momentum without missing a beat. The kind of lineup that makes a coaching staff comfortable because there's no question about the pedigree or the experience or the understanding of what's supposed to happen. And the offense visibly stalled. Not slightly, not in a way you could attribute to a defensive adjustment or a cold shooting stretch or a couple of unlucky bounces. Visibly, the spacing narrowed, the energy dropped. The tempo that had made the first half look almost effortless evaporated like it had never existed. Possessions that should have been quick and decisive became slow and searching. Players who had been attacking with confidence were now standing, waiting, looking for something to develop, rather than creating something from nothing. You could see it happen in real time, possession by possession. The pace that Clark had established, that rhythm that had made every other player on the floor look half a step faster and half a beat ahead of the defense, was gone. And in its absence, you could see how much the offense had been depending on it. Not because the veterans were bad basketball players, they weren't. Not because they didn't understand the system, they did. But because there is a version of this offense that exists when Clark is running it, and a different version that exists when she isn't. And those two versions are not close to each other in terms of what they produce. The contrast between that lineup and what the offense looks like when Clark is directing it was not subtle, it was stark. It was the kind of contrast that doesn't require analysis to see. You didn't need to read a plus-minus chart or calculate points created figures to understand what was happening. You could feel it watching the game, and the feeling was confirmed by everything the numbers said afterward. When she was on, the offense was an organism. When she was off, the offense was a collection of talented individuals trying to create structure from the outside in, rather than having structure created for them from the point of attack. Once you see that contrast, you cannot unsee it. That's not a dramatic thing to say. It's a literal description of what the tape does to you once you've watched it with this question in mind. You go back to the third quarter stretch. You watch the spacing narrow. You watch the decision-making slow down. You watch the energy drain out of possessions that should be quick and decisive, and you understand, without needing anyone to explain it, exactly what is driving the difference. And more importantly, you understand why that difference matters enormously for the conversation that's been building around this program for the last several months. The 2028 Olympics in Los Angeles have been on the horizon long enough that the roster speculation has gone through multiple full cycles already. Who starts? Who leads the offense? How do elite guards coexist on one team without stepping on each other? What does the system look like when the highest level of international competition arrives and every team has done their homework on American personnel and tendencies? Those questions have been asked and answered and re-asked in every possible configuration. Different analysts have come to different conclusions. Different former players have weighed in with different frameworks. The conversation has produced a lot of heat and not always a lot of light. Tonight did not just add data to that conversation, it restructured it. Because the question was never really about whether Caitlin Clark is talented enough to play for Team USA. Nobody was genuinely arguing that she lacked the talent. The question was about fit, about role, about whether her style of play translates to the international stage, about whether elite veterans who have won at the highest level would defer to a player whose experience at this level is newer than theirs. Tonight answered every version of that question simultaneously. The fit isn't a question anymore, it's a fact. When Clark controls the tempo, the offense becomes a different organism. Pace, spacing, decision-making, transition efficiency, all of it elevates in ways that are visible on tape and measurable in the numbers. The veterans aren't being asked to defer to someone less capable than them, they're being asked to run within a system that makes them more capable. That's not a compromise, that's an upgrade. The 33 points created, the plus 35, the 12 assists in 19 minutes, every single data point from tonight points in the same direction. The committee argument for keeping her off a starting guard spot just got significantly harder to make. Not impossible, because committees will always find ways to make arguments if they're motivated to make them, but harder. The evidence is stacking up in one direction with a consistency that is very difficult to argue against once you've actually engaged with it. Think about what the projection math says, even with the understanding that full game projections from partial game samples carry real limitations. If the offense produced at roughly the efficiency Clark was generating during her 19 minutes, sustained over a full game, the margins would belong in record discussions. That's not a realistic expectation for a single game, because rotations exist and defensive adjustments happen and fatigue is a real factor. But the fact that the math produces those kinds of numbers, even accounting for the gaps between projection and reality, is still telling you something important about the rate at which she was operating. And the rate at which a point guard operates is the single most important variable in determining what kind of offense a team produces at the elite international level. Not the rate at which they score, not the rate at which they rebound or defend or shoot from distance, though all of those things matter. The rate at which they generate correct decisions, fast, consistently, under pressure, in a way that makes everyone around them operate at a higher level than they would otherwise. That's the variable. And tonight, that variable was answered clearly. What happens next in this qualifying tournament is going to matter more than most people are treating it right now. It would be easy and honestly tempting to look at one dominant performance against one opponent and apply reasonable skepticism. Great players have great individual games. One game doesn't make a career statement. Context matters, opposition matters, and the international stage has a way of producing adjustments that make early performances look more dominant than they'll end up being once defenses have had time to study tendencies and build specific game plans. All of that is fair. All of that is worth keeping in mind. None of it changed what happened against Senegal.
Because the argument for Caitlin Clark at the Olympic level was never built on one performance. It was built on a consistent body of evidence that has been accumulating across the entire arc of her career, from college to professional basketball to now at the international level. What happened against Senegal didn't create that argument, it confirmed it in the environment where confirmation was most needed and most meaningful. The skeptics who needed to see it in a Team USA uniform in international qualifying competition needed to see it on a real stage with real implications. Tonight was that stage. The performances are stacking. The data is accumulating. Every qualifying game is another data point, and the data points are forming a pattern that has a direction to it. That direction is not ambiguous. The questions about how this roster gets built for Los Angeles in 2028 are only going to get louder as the tournament progresses, because every game that produces the kind of numbers we saw tonight makes the question of why you would construct the offense any other way harder and harder to answer. There is one question that keeps coming back, though. The question the broadcast wasn't willing to ask out loud. The question that the third quarter answered without meaning to. What does this offense look like without her? We saw the answer. The spacing narrowed, the tempo dropped, the organism became a collection of individuals. The difference between those two versions of the offense is not a small thing. It's not a marginal efficiency gap or a slight drop in transition opportunities. It's the difference between an offense that operates with a clarity and a pace that defenses struggle to contain, and an offense that functions adequately because the talent level is high enough that adequate still looks pretty good. Pretty good doesn't win Olympic gold at the highest level of international competition. The teams that win Olympic gold are the ones that have something that defenses can't fully solve. Something that creates problems no matter what adjustment you make, because the problem isn't coming from a set play or a specific action or a tendency that can be scouted and countered. It's coming from a player who operates faster than your defensive system can respond to. A tempo conductor, and Team USA has one. The question is whether the committee is willing to build around that reality clearly and without hesitation, or whether the process is going to involve the kind of political navigation and experience weighting and veteran deference that has complicated roster construction decisions at this level before. The tape makes the right answer obvious. It was obvious tonight against Senegal. It will be obvious in the next game and the game after that. The data is going to keep pointing in the same direction because the player is going to keep producing at the same level, because the level she's operating at isn't a hot streak or a favorable matchup. It's a baseline. It's who she is as a basketball player. 33 points created, 12 assists, 19 minutes, plus 35. Those numbers aren't going anywhere. And the more performances stack on top of them, the harder it gets for anyone to look at this situation clearly and pretend there's still a real debate about what this offense should look like and who should be running it. The 2028 Los Angeles Olympics are coming. The roster will be built. The starting lineup will be set. And right now, in real time, on an international qualifying stage with real implications attached to every possession, one player is making the strongest possible case for how that lineup should read. Not through interviews or social media presence, where the volume of conversation surrounding her name, through the work, through the tape, through the numbers, through the unmistakable, undeniable, visible to anyone paying attention reality of what this offense becomes when she's directing it versus what it becomes when she isn't. You've seen it now, and like we said at the top, once you see it, you cannot unsee it. What happens next is what makes this worth watching.